Welcome back to Iraqi Dinar. Alert, your go-to channel for the latest updates. For over a decade, the Iraqi dinar has been a hot topic for investors and analysts worldwide. Everyone is watching, waiting to see if Iraq will revalue its currency, or do something completely different, like a redenomination. Now, these two terms sound similar, but they are worlds apart, with very different outcomes. Today, we're going to break down what revaluation and redenomination really mean. Look at Iraq's current economy and explore what's most likely to happen. So, stick around to get the real story. First up, what is currency revaluation, or RV? This is when a country's government officially increases the value of its currency against others. Let's say today, $1 equals 1,300 Iraqi dinar, revalued by 50%. The new rate might be $1 to 650 dinar. This makes the dinar stronger and increases the value of your holdings. But this isn't magic. A country revalues only when its economy is strong, it has high foreign reserves, and inflation is under control. It's a sign of economic power, which is why it's so rare. It takes years of solid preparation. On the other hand, we have redenomination. This is totally different. It's simply the process of removing zeros from the currency notes. It doesn't change the actual value. For example, if Iraq removes 3 zeros, a 1,000 dinar note becomes a 1 new dinar note. But that new 1 dinar note would still be worth the same amount in US dollars, around 77 cents. The value doesn't change, so why do it? Countries like Turkey and Brazil have done this to simplify transactions after periods of high inflation, restore public confidence, and modernize their financial systems. It's a practical and psychological change, not a financial gain for anyone holding the currency. So, to figure out what Iraq might do, we have to look at its economy today. Over 90% of Iraq's income comes from oil, making it highly oil-dependent. The country has also faced political instability and corruption, which slowed down reforms. However, its foreign reserves have been growing, and inflation is moderate, not out of control. This means Iraq doesn't urgently need a redenomination to fight hyperinflation. But it also doesn't quite meet all the conditions for a major revaluation. So, could Iraq revalue the dinar? Many investors hope for a massive overnight jump in value. But for that to happen, Iraq needs a diversified economy, a strong banking system, and low corruption. It's not quite there yet. A more realistic scenario for a revaluation would be small, gradual increases over several years. For instance, the rate might move from 1,300 to 1,200 and then slowly appreciate as the economy grows. A huge jump, like 1 dinar to $1, is unfortunately not something you see in economic reality. Now, what about redenomination? The Central Bank of Iraq has actually discussed this multiple times since 2011. The plan was always to remove zeros to simplify things. Redenomination would make accounting easier, modernize the currency for digital payments, and reduce the reliance on carrying huge stacks of cash. A 25,000 dinar note would become a 25 new dinar note, but it would still be worth about $19. This move wouldn't make anyone richer, but it would present a more modern, stable financial image to the world. So, which one is more likely? Based on the facts, a major revaluation has a low to medium probability. It requires deep, long-term reforms that are still in progress. Redenomination, however, has a medium to high probability. It's administratively easier to implement and aligns with the central bank's previous proposals. It's a logical step to modernize the economy. In fact, the most realistic scenario might be a combination of both. Iraq could first redenominate by removing the zeros, and then, over the following years, pursue a slow, steady revaluation as its economy strengthens. This two-phase approach has been successfully used by other developing economies. For investors, the difference is huge. A revaluation means your dinar holdings gain real value. A redenomination means they don't. Your 1 million dinar becomes 1,000 new dinar, but its purchasing power stays exactly the same. It is not a profit event. Before any major change can happen, Iraq must tackle corruption, modernize its banking system, and diversify its economy away from oil. Progress is slow but steady. So, the final conclusion, based on all the evidence, Iraq is far more likely to redenominate its currency before it considers a major revaluation. A massive overnight revaluation remains highly unlikely. The more probable path is redenomination first, followed by gradual, small reevaluations over several years as the country stabilizes and grows. The Iraqi dinar, it's a currency that gets talked about all over the world. Investors watch every announcement from Iraq, hoping for that big news that could change its value overnight. But in all this excitement, a lot of people are mixing up two very different ideas, revaluation and redenomination. They sound similar, but one could make you money, and the other won't. Understanding the difference is key to knowing what's really happening with Iraq's economy. So, let's break it down. First up, revaluation. This is when a country's government officially decides to increase the value of its money. Imagine the exchange rate today is about 1,300 Iraqi dinar to $1. A revaluation would mean the new rate becomes something like 900 dinar to $1. Suddenly, your dinar is stronger and can buy more on the international market. This is what many investors are hoping for. But a big revaluation isn't easy. It requires a strong, stable economy, massive foreign reserves, and global trust. It's a rare move reserved for countries with solid economic fundamentals. Now, let's talk about redenomination. This is completely different. Redenomination is basically a currency makeover. The government decides to chop zeros off the banknotes to make them simpler. For example, a 25,000 dinar note would become a new 25 dinar note. The key thing to remember is that the actual value doesn't change. If a cup of coffee cost 1,000 old dinars, it would now cost 1 new dinar. Your purchasing power stays exactly the same. Countries like Turkey and Brazil have done this to simplify transactions and modernize their currency, not to make anyone rich. It's an administrative change, not an economic boom. So which path is Iraq more likely to take? Let's look at the facts. Iraq's economy is almost entirely dependent on oil. Over 90% of its revenue comes from it. The country also faces political instability and corruption, which slow down any major reforms. While it has growing foreign currency reserves, which is a good sign, the overall economy isn't strong enough to support a massive, sudden revaluation like some people dream of. A jump from 1,300 to a 1-to-1 exchange rate with the dollar is just not realistic right now. If a revaluation happens, it would likely be a very slow, gradual process over many years. Maybe moving from 1,300 to 1,250, and so on. On the other hand, the Central Bank of Iraq has openly talked about redenomination for over a decade. Why? Because it makes sense for them. Getting rid of those extra zeros would make daily transactions, accounting, and banking so much easier. 2. It's a practical step toward modernizing the financial system and moving toward a digital economy. It simplifies everything without creating the economic shock of a revaluation. It's a lower-risk move that has been on the table for a long time. So, what's the final verdict? When you look at all the evidence, redenomination seems far more likely for Iraq in the near future. It's a logical step to clean up the currency and streamline the economy. A major revaluation, the kind that creates overnight profits for investors, highly unlikely for now. International experts from the IMF and World Bank also recommend stability and gradual reform, not dramatic jumps. The most probable scenario, and one that many economists point to, is a two-step process. First, Iraq will likely redenominate by removing the zeros. Then, once the economy is stronger, more diversified, and more stable, they might begin a slow, controlled revaluation over many years. For anyone holding dinar, this means patience is key. A redenomination won't change your wealth, and a true revaluation is probably still a long way off, requiring deep economic and political reforms. First, Iraqi dinar is one of the most talked about currencies in the world. Investors and observers are constantly asking, will Iraq finally revalue its currency, or will it just change its structure? Two key terms dominate these discussions, revaluation and redenomination. They sound similar, but they mean completely different things. 2. really understand what's next for the Iraqi dinar, we need to break down these concepts, look at Iraq's current economic situation, and figure out which path the country is most likely to take. First, let's talk about revaluation. A revaluation is a deliberate move by a country's central bank to increase the value of its currency against others, like the US dollar. For example, if today's exchange rate is 1,300 dinars to $1, a revaluation might change it to 1,000 dinars or even 700 dinars per dollar. This makes the dinar stronger on the global stage. Countries usually do this when their economy is booming, their exports are high, and inflation is under control. A revaluation would mean that Iraqi savings are worth more, imported goods become cheaper, and the dinar gains international respect. However, a major revaluation requires a very strong economy and political stability, which is why it's a rare event. Now, what about redenomination? This is a totally different process. Redenomination is basically a cosmetic change. It involves issuing new banknotes by removing zeros from the old ones, but it doesn't change the currency's actual value. For instance, if Iraq decided to remove 3 zeros, a 25,000 dinar note would become a new 25 dinar note. Your purchasing power stays exactly the same, so why do it? Countries redenominate to simplify daily transactions, get rid of the psychological burden of dealing with huge numbers, and modernize their currency system after years of high inflation. Countries like Turkey and Russia have done this successfully. It makes the financial system easier to manage and boosts public confidence, but it doesn't make anyone richer overnight. So, where does Iraq stand today? To predict its next move, we have to be realistic about its economy. Iraq is heavily dependent on oil. It makes up over 90% of government revenue. The country also faces political instability and significant corruption, which slows down reform. While Iraq's foreign currency reserves have grown, its economy isn't diverse or strong enough to support a massive sudden revaluation. The country also doesn't have the kind of runaway hyperinflation that would make a redenomination an absolute emergency. It's caught somewhere in the middle. So, how likely is a revaluation? Many people hope for a huge overnight jump in the dinar's value, but the economic fundamentals just aren't there yet. A true revaluation requires a stable government, a modern banking system, and diverse national production. Iraq is making progress, but it still has a long way to go. If a revaluation does happen, it's far more likely to be small and gradual. Think of a shift from 1,300 dinars per dollar to maybe 1,250, and then slowly downward over several years. A dramatic leap to 1 dinar equals $1 is not supported by any serious economic analysis. On the other hand, a redenomination seems much more probable. The Central Bank of Iraq has publicly discussed this option for years. It would streamline banking, make daily life easier, and align with the country's goals to modernize its financial system. For investors, this is critical to understand. A redenomination would not increase the value of your dinar holdings. 1 million old dinars would simply become 1,000 new dinars, with the exact same purchasing power. It's a structural change, not a value change. So, which move is more realistic for Iraq? Given the current situation, redenomination is the more likely and practical first step. It's easier to implement and has already been on the government's agenda. Most international economists from organizations like the IMF and World Bank also favor this path, as it promotes stability. A small, gradual revaluation might follow later, but only after Iraq achieves greater political stability, diversifies its economy away from oil, and tackles corruption. The most realistic path for Iraq is likely a two-step process. First, redenominate to simplify the currency, and then slowly revalue over many years as the economy genuinely improves. For now, anyone interested in the Iraqi dinar should focus on the country's real economic progress, not just on rumors of an overnight windfall. The future of the dinar will be built on stability and reform, not speculation. Is the Iraqi dinar about to skyrocket in value? You've probably heard the buzz online about a potential RV or revaluation that could make investors rich overnight. But there's another term that gets thrown around: redenomination, or deleting the zeros. What do these terms actually mean, And which one is more likely for Iraq? Let's break it down in a way that's easy to understand. First, let's talk about revaluation. This is the one everyone gets excited about. A revaluation is when a country officially increases its currency's value. So, if today $1 equals 1,300 Iraqi dinar, after a revaluation, it might equal only 900 dinar. This makes the dinar stronger and boosts the purchasing power of its citizens. Imports like cars and electronics become cheaper. For investors holding dinar, this would mean a significant profit. But here's the catch. Reevaluations are a sign of a very strong, stable and diversified economy. A country has to earn it. Large, sudden reevaluations are extremely rare in modern economics. Now, let's look at redenomination. This is often confused with revaluation, but it's completely different. Redenomination is simply a cosmetic change. It means removing zeros from the currency notes. For example, a 25,000 dinar bill would become a 25 dinar bill. The crucial point is that its value stays exactly the same. The 25,000 dinar note and the new 25 dinar note would buy the exact same amount of goods. So why do it? It simplifies daily transactions, reduces the need to carry huge stacks of cash, and makes accounting easier. It's a practical move to modernize a currency, not a get-rich-quick scheme. So, which path will Iraq take? To figure that out, we need to look at its economy. Iraq is heavily dependent on oil, which makes up over 90% of its government revenue. This makes its economy vulnerable to fluctuating oil prices. The country also struggles with political instability and corruption, which slow down any major economic reforms. While Iraq has built up strong foreign reserves, its economy isn't diversified or robust enough to support a massive sudden revaluation. A sudden jump in the dinar's value would actually harm its non-oil exports and create economic shockwaves. On the other hand, the idea of redenomination has been on the table for years. The Central Bank of Iraq itself has discussed it. A redenomination would solve a real-world problem for Iraqis and their financial system. It makes handling cash easier, modernizes the currency's appearance, and can help build psychological confidence. Most importantly, it's a technical reform that doesn't require a perfect economy. Countries like Turkey and Ghana have successfully done this to clean up their currencies after periods of high inflation. So, what's the most likely scenario? Many economists and international organizations like the IMF suggest that Iraq should focus on foundational reforms first. Fighting corruption, modernizing banks, and diversifying away from oil. Based on this, redenomination is the more practical and likely first step. It cleans up the currency system without needing a perfect economy. A gradual revaluation could happen later, but it would be a slow process, happening step by step over years as the economy genuinely improves. We might see the rate move from 1,300 to 1,250, and then maybe to 1,200. But a dramatic leap to $1 is not supported by any economic reality. So, for those investing in the dinar, it's vital to understand the difference. Redenomination won't bring you financial profit. A revaluation could, but it's likely to be slow and gradual, not the overnight jackpot some are hoping for. The most realistic path for Iraq seems to be redenomination. First, to modernize its currency, followed by a slow, earned appreciation in value as its economy strengthens over the long term. For years, the internet has been buzzing with talk about the Iraqi dinar. Will it suddenly make people rich? Let's cut through the noise and look at the facts. People often throw around two big words, revaluation and redenomination. They sound similar, but they mean completely different things for Iraq's currency and for anyone holding it. So, what's the real story? First, let's talk about revaluation. This is the one everyone gets excited about. A revaluation means a country's currency becomes stronger. For example, if today $1 equals 1,300 Iraqi dinar, a revaluation might change it to $1 for 1,000 dinar, or even less. This makes each dinar worth more. But this doesn't just happen overnight. A country only revalues its currency when its economy is booming, it has massive foreign reserves, and inflation is low. It's a sign of true economic strength. If Iraq revalued, imports would get cheaper, and the currency would gain respect. But is Iraq's economy strong enough for that right now? We'll get to that. Now, let's look at the other option. B. This is much simpler and often misunderstood. Redenomination is just a facelift for the money. It's about removing zeros from the banknotes to make them easier to use. For example, a 25,000 dinar note would become a 25 dinar note. The crucial point here is that the value stays exactly the same. You wouldn't get richer. 1 million old dinar would just become 1,000 new dinar, but it would buy the exact same amount of goods. Countries do this to simplify transactions, modernize their banking system, and move on from periods of high inflation. It's about convenience, not creating wealth. So, what's the reality on the ground in Iraq today? Iraq's economy is heavily dependent on oil, making up over 90% of its revenue. This makes it vulnerable to global oil price swings. The country also faces political instability and a banking system that is still developing, with most people still relying on cash. While Iraq's foreign reserves are growing, which is a good sign, major economic reforms are happening very slowly. D's mixed picture means Iraq isn't strong enough for a massive, sudden revaluation, like making 1 dinar equal to $1. That's just not realistic. So, which path is more likely? Most experts agree that redenomination is far more probable than a major revaluation. Why? Because it's easier to do. It doesn't require a super strong economy and helps modernize the financial system, which is one of Iraq's main goals. The Central Bank of Iraq has been discussing this for over a decade. It would make money easier to handle, simplify accounting, and support a shift to digital banking. This doesn't mean a revaluation is impossible. But if it happens, it will be slow and gradual. We might see the exchange rate move from 1,300 to 1,250. And then maybe to 1,200 over several years. These small, controlled steps are safe and manageable for a developing economy. A huge jump is not on the table according to international financial bodies like the IMF and the World Bank. They advise slow and steady reforms. So, what does this mean for investors? If a gradual revaluation happens, you'd see a slow increase in the value of your holdings. But if Iraq redenominates, which is the more likely first step, the value of your dinar will unchanged at all. You'll just have notes with fewer zeros on them. In conclusion, the most realistic scenario is that Iraq will likely redenominate its currency first to modernize its financial system. After that, if the economy continues to stabilize and grow, we might see a slow, gradual revaluation over many years. The dream of an overnight fortune is just that, a dream. Real economic change takes time, stability, and hard work.